God's power was made perfectly manifest in the person of the Blessed Virgin Mary because she perfectly submitted to his will. She allowed that his will would reign in her life. If we want God's will to reign in our life, we have to submit to his so that his power can be effected within us. In fact, that's why we call her the exemplar of the human race, because she perfectly allowed God to live within her, to guide her life, and to guide all of humanity through her. Through her womb came God's power, God actually living in the world. God came to us through her, not by her merits, but by his. Her merit was just saying yes. Her merit was just submitting herself to God's will, which gives us the great secret. And that's why we call her the exemplar. It gives us the secret of our life, how we must live, just submitting ourselves to God's will. From the very beginning of time, when God created it in the Genesis narrative, he created man and woman to be complementary towards one another, right? Physically complementary, spiritually complementary. Everything about them is meant to be complementary. And for the purpose of what? For the purpose of bringing forth life. That's what man and woman do. That's what marriages are meant to do. In fact, so much so that Jesus, when he comes on the scene, he calls marriage, right, the exemplar of our relationship with God. That's why he says marriage doesn't exist in heaven, not between man and woman anymore, because marriage on earth is meant to be the sign and the symbol of what our relationship with God is meant to be always and forever in heaven. We will live in a marriage, a perfect union with God that's complementary and that brings forth life. And so when we think about our complementary on earth, we're meant to see in that, even now, that humanity is meant to live in a relationship of complementarity with God, that we're meant to allow him to enter into our life so that we can bring forth life, so that we can be fruitful in this world in a spiritual way, spiritual fruitfulness. And that was also exemplified by the Blessed Virgin Mary. When God became man, he became man and he presented himself to a woman in complementarity, not in sexual complementarity, but as a mother to a son. And in that complementarity, God became manifest in humanity. And through that complementarity towards one another, not only showed us what we were made for, that we were made for heaven, but also showed forth what the power of God can do in our humanity when he lives within us. That's what we're made for. So much so that today we celebrate the Basilica of St. Mary Major, which is the very first church and basilica in the Western world named after the Blessed Virgin Mary. And so what we celebrate today was talked about in a homily by St. Cyril of Alexandria. And he says this about the Blessed Virgin Mary, especially about the power of God working through her. He says, "We salute you, for in your holy womb, he who is beyond all limitation was confined." Now, that's not because of her power. That's because of his submission, right? He submitted himself to humanity, showing how powerful he is, that he who is without limitation, he allowed himself, and by his own power, allowed himself to be contained by humanity. Because of you, the Holy Trinity is glorified and adored. The cross is called precious and is venerated throughout the whole world. The heavens exult, the angels and the archangels make merry. Demons are put to flight. The devil, who is the tempter, is thrust down from heaven. The fallen race of man is taken up on high, right? Our humanity is taken into heaven through this union. All creatures possessed by the madness of idolatry have attained knowledge of what is true, right? We cast down our idolatry when we see truth come into the world. Believers receive holy baptism. The church is established throughout the world. Pagans are brought to repentance. That's you and I. Those of us who are pagans are brought to repentance so that we can submit ourselves to the mission of God. What more is there to say? Because of you, the light of the only begotten Son of God has shone upon those who sat in darkness and in the shadow of death. Because Mary perfectly submitted to God's will, allowed him into her life, the whole world was restored, right? The demons were put to flight. Evil has been cast down. Those of us who have lived in darkness have the truth and salvation come to us. This is the result of one person's submission to God, and all the rest of humanity who subsequently submits to him will manifest the power of God within us, not by our own merits, but by his power. His power is manifest in us when we submit. What does that word submit mean? Submission. It means to get under one's mission, under the mission of God. If we want God's power to be made manifest in the world, It's going to be by us submitting to God's will so that he can be made manifest in us, and that exchange of love that he desires in our soul, what we were made for. When we become fully alive, that's when God's power will be made manifest in us, just as it was made manifest perfectly in the Blessed Virgin Mary.